I wanted to touch the topic of the two approaches described by Meg Baker. I've read them, and I also see that you incorporated them into Circle of Ants, where I think you detailed a much better, in a more, let's say, detailed way how lines and how do you expect lines and base to be actually used.
10 years of play and thought about it. I mean, I'm certain that she would do the same. I will point out that as soon as I read those words on the forge, I said, that is meaningful. So
they are really illuminating. And well, one side question that I had in a corner of my mind was, is this really so dichotomic? So is it possible for a group to want to stay far within the borders for certain topics while walking along the border, along the line on another topic at the same time?
Well, maybe it's the fact that I was thinking of this as binary, that if you go toward any line, then that's what you're doing. I wasn't thinking about anything and everything. I was thinking about at all. I mean,
of course, I think so.
I mean, mainly because I can't really conceive of play in which, every available, bit of content, we'll find the line everywhere. It's like, I think I saw that movie and I think it kind of lost the plot halfway through. So, so I guess that's why I was thinking of it. I mean, but I wasn't thinking of it as all topics versus no topics. I guess it was none or any.
Okay.
It was just the way I divided it in my mind. Okay, but go on. There's you said there were.
That's reasonable, and well, I've seen that an interesting point in particular in Circle of Ants, which is the explicit. First of all, there was an explicit indication that there were some built-in lines that were predefined at that point within the system, which was interesting. And then the most interesting point I found was the indication, don't set lines to protect other people, which I think you already described the reason. You already explained the reason why you set that, because the patronizing issue that you were talking about. No? I found it interesting because many people I spoke to actively advocated to using safety tools when they see another person that looks in trouble, so to protect the other person. So I found very interesting to see the explicit indication to do the opposite.
Now, do you remember what Keenan Kibrick discovered in his high school students in the interview? Because of when the person who did the interview with me that you listened to.
The discussion about the playing the Great Gatsby.
So actually, I think it was the Scarlet Letter.
They say.
I think it was the Scarlet Letter.
Okay.
But the idea was that, and first of all, let me begin by saying that I think he's kind of a lunatic to be doing this with high school students at all, in lines and veils and stuff. But hey, it's his job. So, but the deal is that when I say lunatic, I'm kidding. I mean, I regard that as very brave. Maybe I prefer to play with adults for a reason. But the point though is that if what he found was that he thought a particular group was going into inappropriate social space, that they were literally abusing the person who was playing the targeted woman, right, for adultery, and that they were really laying it on, how terrible it was, and she looked miserable and hurt, and she looked like she was in trouble. He went over there to try to intervene, and everybody turned on him and told him, get out of here, we're fine.
Yes. Okay, so, now I remember that point.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, because how easy is it for your little saintly savior button to be pushed when you see somebody, and you say, aha, they're in trouble, I shall now ride to the rescue. When that person may indeed have been affected, but this kind of affecting, or the way it was expressed by that person was in their eyes aesthetically and emotionally acceptable.
Yeah.
Now, I do think that we need to go back to problems at the hobby and cultural level where the disrespecting of persons, especially the interference among those authorities that I was talking about, will reach very abusive levels. And whereby somebody affecting the fiction in ways that they claim they can do, basically as a way to tell that other person that your input is not important. That there are also important points that I don't think we have very good vocabulary for. Fiction isn't reality. And in any bank of fiction in development, and notice I say in development, while it is being made, there are things that are immutable and things that are mutable, things that may change and things that may not. Our language for distinguishing which is which in role playing has very little vocabulary for that. But that is a reality of the way fiction works, and the reality of fiction. I can't believe I said that. It is it is, I think, a property of the creation of fiction that that distinction exists. And so a person who realizes that that distinction is poorly formed for us because we don't really address it very well. We kind of find it by, feeling in the dark rather than by any understanding of it. People can be very abusive in that context by changing things, about a character that the other person would have thought were immutable. Stuff like that. So I'm basically suggesting that yes, there are problems that do hurt people, but they are typically not found during the exercise of functioning play in terms of play's own properties. And that those things that are wiggly or difficult or questionable or unwanted that do occur in the context of the functional properties of play, we can deal with that. We know that that is the fictional stuff and that we are the humans. We know that. And it's actually manageable for the most part, I think. A person would have to be a very, very toxic person indeed to actually be able to, override that. And in those cases, that's when you can say, all right, it's not even you not only do you have like really crap judgment about what's supposed to be in play, but I'm not even sure you can play. You said you came here and you were able to play football, but considering how rotten you've been during play to the point of actually not playing football with us, you need to go find something else to do on Saturday afternoons. So
that's fair.
Yeah. Is this making some sense about that?
Yes, very good. Could you share an example of a recent case where a line or a veil was actively called at your table?
Yeah. Now, the one that I said a few minutes ago was close, but I didn't actually say anything, nor another person I know at the table who exactly like me, and I think we were not actually thinking back, and I'm including one of the players who was actually kind of a rough and tough, crude guy. And I don't mean the character, I mean the player himself is kind of, boisterous and crude. All of us flinched. I remember I mean, that particular
Yeah,
player
it might.
who had not said that, but that particular player, the one guy who was sort of the crudest guy at the table, he fell silent at that moment, and his ordinary table talk just stopped. And I didn't even look at the person I know best at the table, but I can imagine, I can just imagine. And I know for myself, I was jarred and had to like find a way to start speaking again
Yeah.
in terms of play. So I know that happened around the table, but we didn't
Of
say
course,
anything.
non-verbal communication exists
Right.
too. So it
Right.
might be a non-verbal communication case.
Yeah.
But in order to make people understand easily the
Well,
concepts, I think you did a very great job explaining them in circle of hands. But a concrete example is the best way, you know?
well, I do also want to address when was it actually said? And that's when, yes, I mean, in the current groups of people, or I say group, it's not a fixed group of people every single time we meet, but there's a community of roughly 30 people that any given subset will be playing with each other as a game at any given time. And I have 3 such groups running every week, sort of, subsets of this general set of people. And there will be times when somebody either uses the word line, which happens rarely, but every so often, and then somewhat more often, does somebody say veil? Yeah, I think it's usually me who says, well, let's just veil that part. And usually, there's a bunch of people around the table, including maybe the person who's speaking, saying, good idea. Um, Partly because sometimes our imaginations are so heinous, we'd rather keep that in our private imagination. And each person is visualizing something different, but that's our business, la la la. And so that's kind of, especially in, oh yeah, okay, in a game that we played, was it early last year? Whenever it was that we
Mm-hmm.
played the science fiction game Chaotic. In that game, which is, without being too explicit in the text itself, can very, very rapidly go into very disturbing experiences or disturbing content, in the sort of in the scary alien world dimension where the characters travel. Um, there are rampant experiments on human beings. There are breeding, forced breeding programs. There
Mm-hmm.
are a variety of, there's animal cruelty. Um, and when play brought them into the laboratories of one of the heinous non-player characters, one of the players said, can we not look into, the tubes or the, enclosures? Can we just not look into
Yeah.
those? And meaning I mean, clearly the characters would be looking and would be shocked. That was implicit in what they were saying, but the we wouldn't look there in terms of verbal descriptions. And
Okay.
who I don't know how far I would have gone, but I probably would have described some things. Said, oh, because I was the game master. Oh, I said, I better veil that to myself, which is more or less exactly what the person said. But the point was, it was necessary because knowing myself, I probably would have gone ahead and described enough to get the imaginations going in more specific directions.
Yeah.
So that was another example. Um, but as far as people saying line, it usually had to do with the possibility of rape in a given adventure. And a person at the table, will say, line on that. It's just not something, realistic or not or whatever. It's just not something we need to be dealing with here. Um, and and that actually happened in a Circle of Hands game. Not that characters were lining up or grouping up to actually do this. But conceptually, knowing the culture, the person was kind of taking the broad view of the circumstances right then and saying, it's not like we're hitting it, but culturally in the fiction, I can kind of see it over there. Let's not go there. So that happens.
Okay.
It's not very common, but it is an ordinary vocabulary for the people I play with. And it's usually conducted not in a way of, oh my God, you asshole, you ruined it, so much as, as we play along, as we continue. The more I think about that event that I mentioned before, given the person who had spoken about the woman who had been killed in the story, given the person who had spoken and what they're like, and given my memories of the responses, which was most distinctive in that one player who can be counted on to chatter, right? Just in general, whatever happens, you get kind of a da-da-da-da kind of a chatter about it. And the fact that he shut up instantly. The more I think about it, I'm going to speculate that the person who had spoken reflected by themselves. That they basically were told fairly, clearly by us without the vocabulary, you're over the line. So I'm going to suggest, I can't know for sure, but just looking back on all of that, every piece of that kind of communication was in place. So I'd say that does count, or conceivably.
Okay. That's fine, I think.
Are those good examples? I mean, useful examples for?
Yes, very good, thank you. We already went through the problem with the term safety tool, so I accept that you use danger tools instead.
Well,
correct?
Even that's kind of amusing because it's not just danger; it's even just as trivial, relatively trivial, as aesthetic preferences. Right? I mean, we don't have it. This doesn't all have to be about trauma.
I think the danger thing is more of a joke or a bit of an exaggeration, if I understand correctly.
Just to reverse the safety tool terminology more than anything.
Okay, nice.
But it is also fair to say that should we go into territory that we may find productively problematic, which much art does, then we should be doing it in some fashion, right? I mean, we should be doing it in some recognition of how we're going to do this so it doesn't just become crap. And there are tools when we do
that. Of course, you know that the tools themselves, the safety tools or safety mechanics, are now widespread, and there are many of them: X card, O card, N card, script change, check-in, open door, and so on.
You have a full Pokemon deck.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so
for all I know, by the way, some of those are perfectly valid. For all I know, I'm not going to.
Of course, yeah.
The one that I will object to is the X card, which I consider crude and ineffective, and misdirected. I know the person.
Yeah.
I mean, or I knew the person who came up with it. I do not regard the person highly, either as a person or as a role-playing practitioner.
Okay.
So
anyways,
I'm not impressed. I'm not interested in what that person does.
But in the original document on the X card by John Stavropoulos, sorry, it's very hard for me to articulate, there was a part about lines and veins. Why not using lines and veins itself? The description was interesting because it somehow acknowledged what we already discussed today and in your previous video. So the fact that he said on many occasions I've seen people who draw a line across a certain content are the very people who bring that content into the game. People often say one thing and do another. They may not know what they want or the reason between and so on.
So isn't that more so? Well, all that's true, but none of that says that doing so is necessarily a problem or a trauma.
Exactly. No, I agree with you on that.
I already stated my rude things about the person who came up with this, and I stand by what I said.
Okay. So while speaking with many people here in Italy about their usage of these kind of mechanics, basically my first goal in addressing so many different people on that was to get examples on how do they really use them. Because on the internet, I've noticed that there is a huge amount of information about these mechanics, how they are supposed to work, and a huge amount of examples of the terrible things that are supposed to happen without these mechanics. But it is very difficult to find an example of these mechanics themselves while being used. So I was interested in how the people are really using them. Well, just to trying to recap, it's my words, not theirs, but trying to recap the advantages or the benefits that most people see in using such kind of tools. In my understanding, I've seen 3 of them, more or less. The first one is to create awareness, is that they tool create awareness. For example, if I have a fade to black mechanics, it basically informs you that you can veil a triggering content. Which should be, it's enough for me.
Why don't we just say content instead of triggering content? Right? Why do we have to put it in the context of triggering? Why don't we just talk about it as
correct.
Fade to black as actually just a statement that you can use in play because you want to?
I totally agree with you, but we already went through this. We know when we talk about this in Italy, most of the time it's already framed inside that kind of substrate. This is for sure.
Okay,
but
sorry.
anyways,
go ahead.
That first goal to create awareness is the one that would be enough for me. That I usually start games when I have new people at the table. I usually start games by saying, please know that we can stop whenever we want. If something, is there something you don't like, is there something you don't feel okay with, you just say it, and we can talk about this and so on. And actually, a few people have told me or have extrapolated from their examples that the tool itself is not actually used so often, because once you have created the mindset of the awareness of the consent, afterwards what happens is what usually happens also at my table. So people just talk and say, oh no, I'm not okay with this, and fine, and we go on, even without really touching the card. The card was just a vehicle for having a talk about consent at the beginning of the game.